At the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean, at a depth of nearly 4,000 meters, lies the most famous ship in human history. More than 110 years have passed since that cold night when the giant liner sank, taking around 1,500 lives with it. During that time, humanity has been to the moon, created powerful computers, and built massive space stations. But the famous wreck is still rotting away in complete darkness. It would seem simple enough. Why not just bring it back to the surface? We have giant cranes, deep-sea vehicles, and billions of dollars. Over the years, ambitious businessmen proposed the craziest ideas, from filling the hull with plastic balls to completely freezing the water around the ship. Yet none of these plans were ever carried out. And the real obstacle has nothing to do with the enormous pressure of the water. The answer to why the Titanic has still never been raised turned out to be far darker. Today, we'll look at the most ambitious recovery plans and find out why, despite all our technology, the legendary ship is doomed to remain in the darkness forever. The history of attempts to raise the Titanic began literally just weeks after the disaster. As early as April 1912, relatives of wealthy victims, the Astors, Guggenheims, and Widener family, seriously discussed the possibility of lifting the ship to recover the bodies. But it quickly became clear that the technology of the time simply could not handle such an operation. Even then, the first fantasticische projects appeared, though none were ever brought to life. In the end, the Titanic was forgotten for decades. Its exact location became a mystery that even the military could not solve. It was only in 1985 that Robert Ballard's expedition finally discovered the wreck. Working together with the United States Navy, the team was actually searching for sunken submarines, and the Titanic's coordinates were merely a cover for the secret mission. When the robot Argo passed over the liner's deck, the scientists in the control room froze. They saw boilers, portholes, and the bow section emerging from the darkness like a giant ghost. The excitement of the discovery quickly turned into concern. The ship had split into two parts lying about 600 meters apart. Debris was scattered everywhere around them. Around 6,000 artifacts were brought to the surface from the liner, from dishes bearing the White Star Line logo to personal jewelry and fragments of porcelain. But the ship itself remained untouched. Many researchers and historians began asking an important question. Should anything even be disturbed at all? Beyond the technical challenges, there was also an ethical dilemma. The Titanic is a mass grave. Any careless interference could desecrate the resting place of 1,500 people. So why, despite having access to the wreck, has no one attempted to recover even a single part of it? To understand that, you first need to imagine what a depth of 3,800 meters really means. First, let's look at why the obvious recovery methods simply do not work. The simplest idea would be to pump air into the hull. If all the holes were sealed and the water displaced, the ship should theoretically rise to the surface according to the laws of physics. And in fact, this method is often used to recover smaller ships and submarines. But with the Titanic, everything is different. The first attempt of this kind was discussed as early as 1914. Engineers proposed lowering flexible pipes to the ocean floor, securing them inside the hull and pumping in compressed air under enormous pressure. But calculations showed that to force the water out of the compartments at a depth of nearly 4 kilometers, it would require pressure exceeding 400 atmospheres. No compressor of that era could possibly handle it. And even today, with all our modern technology, the task remains incredibly difficult. For comparison, a pressure of 400 atmospheres is roughly like placing a 4-ton truck on every square centimeter of your body. Any hose lowered to such a depth without special protection would be crushed instantly. A second option was to raise the ship mechanically using cranes. In the 1990s, the Walt Disney Company considered a project involving giant floating structures. The idea was to attach cables to the hull and slowly pull it upward over several days using massive winches on the surface. But another enemy comes into play here: the weight of the Titanic itself. Even empty, the hull weighs tens of thousands of tons. Add to that the resistance of the water and the layers of silt that, over decades, have practically glued the wreck to the ocean floor. No crane on Earth is capable of lifting such a load from that depth without risking snapped cables and total loss of control. The most powerful floating cranes in the world can lift around 15,000 tons, and even they operate at depths of only about 100 meters. Here we are dealing with 4 kilometers and a mass several times beyond their limits. There is also a third, less obvious obstacle. Even if we assume we somehow created an incredible composite cable capable of handling the load, moving the ship through the water column would become a disaster in itself. The deep ocean is relatively calm, but the closer you get to the surface, the stronger the currents become. The rising wreck would begin to sway, twist, and slam against the cable. No dynamic positioning system in the world today can control a process like that with meter-level precision. Norwegian engineers who simulated the recovery on supercomputers concluded that the risk of losing the wreck and damaging the support vessel exceeds 90%. But this raises a logical question. Why not recover the ship piece by piece? Specialists have successfully retrieved fragments of sunken ships before. Why not cut the Titanic's hull into sections and lift them one by one? The answer turned out to be so unexpected that even the most determined billionaires abandoned their ambitious plans. To understand what the Titanic is today, we need to look inside the wreck itself. When the ship sank, its steel framework was exposed to saltwater. As corrosion spread, strange formations began appearing on the metal. Scientists named them rusticles. They look like rust-colored icicles up to a meter long, hanging from bulkheads, railings, and decks. These formations are so fragile that even the slightest touch from a submersible's manipulator causes them to collapse into a cloud of reddish dust that lingers in the water for a long time, reducing visibility. But rusticles are only the visible part of the destruction. The real problem lies within the metal itself. In the early 20th century, the steel used to build the Titanic was produced with a high sulfur content. This made the metal hard, but extremely brittle in low temperatures. Many believe this very characteristic played a fatal role during the collision with the iceberg. Instead of bending, the hull plating cracked. Today, more than a century later, that same steel, saturated with salt and weakened by corrosion, has turned into something resembling layered pastry. If anyone tried attaching cables to it and beginning a lift, the metal would simply tear apart under its own weight, collapsing into thousands of fragments. Microbiologist Roy Cullimore from the Canadian Museum of Nature made an even more disturbing discovery that completely changed the way scientists view the fate of sunken ships. He found that colonies of bacteria are thriving inside the wreck, literally feeding on the steel. These microorganisms consume the iron structures, turning them into a fragile, porous material. Since the sinking, the bacteria have devoured tens of thousands of tons of metal, leaving behind only a delicate skeleton, ready to crumble at the slightest touch. Calculations show that these microorganisms destroy up to 100 kilograms of iron every single day across the hull. That is why any attempt to cut the ship apart would most likely lead to its complete collapse. The only relatively stable section is considered to be the Titanic's bow, but 600 meters away lies the stern, and it presented scientists with a far darker and more disturbing surprise. Why has it become an area that even deep-sea robots avoid entering? And what shocking discovery did researchers make when they first looked inside? While the whole world focuses on the bow section, which still looks somewhat recognizable, the Titanic's stern is an entirely different story. When the liner broke apart, the stern sank separately, spinning and rapidly filling with water. Unlike the bow, which descended relatively smoothly, the stern plunged almost vertically, tumbling and tearing itself apart from the sudden pressure changes. Today, the stern section lies 600 meters from the bow, and its condition can be described in one word: catastrophic. While the bow still preserves some recognizable features, the stern has become a chaotic mass of twisted metal. The decks are crushed together like an accordion. Bulkheads have been ripped apart. Huge pieces of hull plating jut out at unnatural angles. The reason for this destruction lies in the way it sank. As the stern went down, air pockets inside the ship collapsed, one after another, deforming the structure from within. The process was so violent that some fragments were thrown hundreds of meters away from the main wreckage. Researchers studying the stern with deep-sea submersibles say that entering it is nearly impossible. Every passageway is blocked by collapsed structures. The metal there is even more fragile than in the bow because of the extreme deformation and the heavier concentration of bacteria. Any attempt to lift a piece of the stern would likely cause it to crumble apart in the grasp of the robotic manipulators. But maybe there was still some way around this problem. Some enthusiasts believed the Titanic really could be raised, and the proposed method was highly unusual. Every Titanic history enthusiast has heard about the theory of filling the wreck with plastic balls. The idea was based on the work of Danish inventor Carl Kreuer, who once successfully raised a sunken vessel using a similar method. The concept was simple: pump millions of tiny, hollow polypropylene balls into the hull through pipes. They would displace the water and, being lighter than it, create enormous buoyant force. Supporters of the idea believed this method could raise even the largest sections of the wreck, while the entire recovery project would pay for itself through ticket sales and broadcast rights. But the plan ran into two major problems. First, the balls would have to be delivered into every compartment, which is extremely difficult given the wreck's current condition. Second, to keep them from being crushed by the pressure, they would need to be made from ultra-strong materials whose cost would far exceed the value of the ship itself. In the end, the project was considered technically possible but economically pointless. Another bold proposal came from British engineer John Pierce. He suggested freezing the water around the Titanic with liquid nitrogen, creating a giant block of ice. According to his calculations, the frozen mass, being lighter than water, would rise to the surface with the ship trapped inside it. On paper, the idea looked elegant, but in reality, it would have required such enormous amounts of nitrogen that the operation would cost more than the budget of a small country. More importantly, the sudden temperature change would most likely tear apart what remained of the ship. Interest in these projects quickly faded, leaving behind only disappointment and the realization that there are no simple ways to save the Titanic. But perhaps lifting the entire ship isn't necessary. Maybe recovering only its most valuable part would be enough? The bow section, which survived better than the rest and lies separately? It was this very idea that convinced one billionaire to invest millions into building a specialized underwater robot. But when he finally reached the site, he said, "We are never going back there again." What did he see down there that changed everything? Victor Vescovo, a billionaire fascinated by the fate of the Titanic, led an expedition to the liner in 2019. It was the first full-scale manned expedition in 14 years. Vescovo himself is a man who has descended into the deepest points of every ocean, seen the abyss of the Mariana Trench, and passed over the wrecks of sunken aircraft carriers. But when his deep-sea submersible, limiting factor, capable of withstanding pressure equal to 1,000 atmospheres, approached the bow of the liner, Victor was shocked. High-resolution cameras mounted on robotic vehicles captured something researchers had never clearly seen before because of poor visibility. The Titanic's bow section, which for decades had been considered relatively stable, was in fact already close to collapse. The famous railings at the bow, the same ones Jack and Rose used for their iconic scene in James Cameron's film, had fallen away. Footage brought back by the expedition showed that the once majestic bow now looked more like a half-destroyed house of cards than a sunken ship. After analyzing the images, scientists reached a clear conclusion. The Titanic can no longer be raised, not even in pieces. Even the most careful mechanical contact is now unacceptable. At this point, it is no longer a shipwreck in the usual sense of the word, but a massive memorial that nature is slowly turning into dust. According to experts, by the middle of the 21st century, the Titanic will lose all structural integrity, and its remains will become nothing more than a pile of rust. But what if the ship doesn't have to be physically raised at all? Could it be preserved in some other way using modern technology? In 2022, the company Magellan Limited, together with documentary filmmakers, carried out an unprecedented operation. The team decided to create a complete three-dimensional digital model of the Titanic with accuracy down to a single millimeter. To do this, two underwater vehicles, Romeo and Juliet, spent more than 200 hours beneath the surface, capturing over 700,000 images from every possible angle. The result was the most detailed digital twin of a sunken ship ever created. The images reveal every rivet, every shattered bottle, every fragment of coal scattered across the ocean floor. For the first time, scientists were able to see the entire ship without the distortion and darkness that limit visibility underwater. The digital model made it possible to closely study the damage, refine the understanding of how the hull broke apart, and even discover new artifacts that had previously gone unnoticed. But the most important discovery made by the creators of the digital twin was deeply unsettling. Scientists compared the new model with archival footage, and the results shocked them. The rate of decay is accelerating dramatically. In the 30 years since the first detailed surveys, the bow section has lost around 20% of its mass. The digital model became more than just a beautiful image. It became a document preserving the Titanic in a form that will soon no longer exist. But are there still other barriers preventing the liner from being raised from the ocean floor? Even if we imagine that engineers somehow found a way to reinforce the hull and robots managed to carefully cut apart the wreckage, one more insurmountable obstacle would remain. It has nothing to do with physics, corrosion, or money. It has to do with law and diplomacy. The Titanic lies in international waters, but its remains are protected by several nations at once. In 2019, an updated international agreement between the United States, the United Kingdom, Canada, and France officially came into force. Under this agreement, any deep-sea operations at the wreck site require special authorization from the governments of those countries. Moreover, the area around the wreck has officially been declared a protected memorial site. This means that raising parts of the hull is permitted only for scientific purposes and under the strictest supervision. Commercial recovery, however, is prohibited. But obtaining such permission is almost impossible. Any applicant must prove that their actions will not cause damage. And as we've already learned, any contact with the hull today is essentially the same as destroying it. As a result, the licensing process effectively blocks all recovery attempts, because meeting its requirements is physically impossible. There is also another legal detail that is rarely discussed. RMS Titanic Incorporated held exclusive rights to recover artifacts for many years, but its license does not extend to the hull itself. Under American law, a sunken ship recognized as a memorial cannot be raised in its entirety, even if it were preserved in perfect condition. So what will happen to the Titanic? And now we arrive at the answer to the main question. Why is the Titanic still lying where it sank more than 110 years ago? The answer is not the depth, the pressure, the money, or the ethics. The answer is that raising it is impossible. The metal has been consumed by bacteria and has become as fragile as cardboard. So the Titanic will remain where it lies, a monument to human arrogance and a warning to future generations. It cannot be preserved in a museum hall, but it can be left undisturbed on the ocean floor, where it is slowly, yet inevitably, returning to the earth. What do you think? Does humanity have the moral right to leave this ship in peace and stop disturbing its remains? Or are we obligated to recover everything possible while it still exists? Share your opinion in the comments.
तो वीडियो में बने रहना जैसे कि आप लोग जान रहे हो हम अभी दुकान पे जा रहे हैं। देखो भाई किस तरीके का हमारे गांव का नज़ारा है और कितना हरियाली है जो और वहाँ पे एक भाभी बैठे हुए हैं लगता है बात कर रहे हैं कहीं चलो भाई चलो चलते हैं दुकान पे ऐसे ही टहलते फिरते यहाँ पे देखो एक लड़की आ रही है जो कि जिनोरा घास ली हुई है ये हाँ वीडियो में बने रहना भाई। चलते हैं रोड पे, दुकान है जहाँ पे। देखो यहाँ पे मकई लगाया हुआ है खेत में, हमारे ही गांव का किसी का है। देखो हमारे गांव में पेड़ से ज़्यादा तार दिखाई देती है दोस्तों। जिधर देखो उधर तार ही तार रहता, जिसे हम लोग फिदा खाते हैं, चुभने वाला और गोबा वाला, जिससे परम होती है। और रोड देखो कितना खराब है। जो ये सब हमारे गांव का ही सभी लोगों का कारण है, क्योंकि हर लोग मेन रोड पे जानवर बांधता लादा जाता है, जिससे खराब होती है। देख सकते हो किला इस तरीके का। इतना ही नहीं, इसमें बालू वाला गाड़ी जब स्पीड में आती है तो और ख़राब हो जाती है। यहाँ पे देखना दोस्तों, दो छोटी बच्ची है, बहुत ही सुंदर और क्यूट लगती है। कहाँ खेलने ना गया रे? आए तो हर कहाँ की जा। देखो भाई पूरी हरियाली, हमारे गांव के जो फंदा है सभी में हरियाली किस तरीके से भरा हुआ है, जो देख सकते हो। आज कहाँ देखो भाई, गांव से निकलकर बोलते बोलते जो हमारे गांव का देवी स्थान है, देवी माता का मंदिर है, वहाँ पे आ चुके हैं। कुछ ही दूर बाकी है, दूर से जाल करो, क्योंकि वहाँ हम जल्द पहुँचने वाले हैं। तो वीडियो में बने रहना। दुकान पर जाते हैं, देखते हैं पापा जी क्या कर रहे हैं, पिताजी। देखो यहाँ पे थोड़ा 6 से 7 खेत के बाद एक हमारी भी खेत है, जो कि दादा परदादा का है, बहुत बड़ा पुर्जों का है। तो बने रहना।
एक बड़ा ले ली ना जी, हमें जितना काबू जितना ही लगे, फिर काबू फिर ले जाए। एक बड़ा ला ली तो एक बड़ा ना ला तो एक बड़ा ला दे, ये ला तो हां फिर कर दे
तो देखो भाई कितना बड़ा बरसान है जो हमारे गांव का लोग इतना से इतना खराब और गिरा हुआ है कि अपने ही गांव के बगल में इतना बड़ा गड्ढा खतवा दिया है। सिर्फ घर जब नया नया बनता है तो उसमें मट्टी गिरवाता भरवाता है, वो जगह नहीं, उसके कारण इतना गड्ढा हुआ। इसमें बेचारी लोगों को जान भी चली गई है। आगे मंदिर जहाँ थे वहीं थे, उसके बावजूद भी लोगों को आँख में कुछ नहीं दिखाई देता। गड्ढे पे गड्ढे कराया जा रहा है। यहाँ पे जो खनन विभाग है वो भी कुछ नहीं कर रहा। और हम तो खुद ही अलग जा रहे हैं, चलने में, खाने में, पीने में, बोलने में, सब चीज़ से। तो हम और ही क्या कर सकते हैं, जो हो सकता है वही कर रहे हैं। और ये देखो जो हम दुकान दिए हुए हैं जिनका ज़मीन में, उन्हीं का ये घर बना है। ये घर है या फिर और कुछ है, आप लोग कमेंट में बताएं। वीडियो को ज़्यादा से ज़्यादा लाइक शेयर फॉलो करें। तो देखो भाई इस तार में तो फिदा, इन दोनों तार में फिदा हो रहा है भाई। खाने का मौका आएगा, हम लोगों को मौका मिलेगा। वाह, उधर जो सामने दूर में दिख रही है वाइट वाइट, वो सब भेड़ें चल रही हैं। जो हमारे गांव है, गांव के बगल में लगभग 1 से 1.5 किलोमीटर के बगल में बाजार है, वहाँ पे गडेरी रहते हैं। कास्ट के गडेरी हैं, उन्हें क्या बोलता है मुझे नहीं पता, वही चला रहे हैं यहाँ पे। तो वीडियो अच्छा लगा तो जहाँ तक हो सके लाइक शेयर करो, और हम क्या ही बोल सकते हैं। देखो भाई हम रोड पर पहुंचने वाले हैं। यहीं पे हमारा दुकान है, जो सामने ट्रांसफार्मर दिख रही है, या फिर और आगे जाएंगे तो दिखेगी, उसका बगल वाला ही दुकान है। तो चलिए वहाँ पर जाके दिखाते हैं क्या है, कैसे है और क्यों है। हमारा पापा का किसी एक्सीडेंट की वजह से जो पैर है, पैर कट गया और कटवाने पड़ गया। इसलिए हम लोग बहुत ही मजबूर हैं, बहुत ही लाचार हैं। खाने पीने के लिए भी सोचना पड़ता है भाई। अगर आप लोग सपोर्ट करोगे तो आप लोगों की वजह से हम खाएंगे पिएंगे और जो चीज़ हो सके करेंगे आप लोगों के लिए। ये हमारे गांव का गाड़ी है जो भैया हैं, ये गाड़ी है डॉक्टर साहब की जो क्लिनिक पे रहते हैं। देखो बस जा रहे हैं।
ऐसे ना कर है यार
दिन भर बैठ नहीं रहा कुछ करे के लिए गया के ना गानों पर के लिए आए
फंड दे करा था। अब भाई मीटर में से फुल करता है।
गया निकालती था ना फिर मीटर
कितने निकल
जेन में
पैसा दीजिए
वही मीटर
ना कल को था
अभी निकालती था पर बचे
फगवा
वही चलते नहीं
खाले के दे
चला
एक मीटर हो
चला दियो को ठीक है चला
चलाओ रेल के मिल जे होना था हो गया अब दोबारा थोड़ा
अरे उतना का मैं लिए है जी वह जो उतना के अथी हो इसलिए कहीं भाई हमरा बाचबे ना करो भाई चोरा में ऐसा बड़े खटारवे लगा खोल दे सारो
गलती ना कहां
हो जी
टोटल ना को काले 15 रुपए
हम तो कहियो का हवे ना करा दी
अब काहे लगाती लगा उनको फाइन मरे ने काटूंगा
कौन
हम
कौन
कहियो बोला दिया
किन का
वो घड़ी मीटर नहीं ना तो
भाई बजे हैं
कटल के फट फट
लोग सर के ना मार के
ऐसे पकड़ के सब तावा
1 लाख कह रहे था 20,000 मुझे हो गेला
20,000 17,000 मिलके
तोरा से का मिल सकता है हमें ना
कल के
लेल को जरा बुला दवा।
अरे कहार की वो सब है पता चलते है सन
आज आना ही बाबा
अरे हां भाई
आए
आधार आदमी के पता चलती सब
हां कह रहे यहां पे ठेकेदार भाई
अब के मेडिकल वाला
जाइए तो लगे
बात
रहना
सब के लावे ले जाइलो
बड़ी दिन है सर चल छोड़ा गाड़ी
जाएगा जो काम करे आप डाउन करे
सरकारी अप्रूवल मिल गेले होगा
जरा
के मतलब
मैं एक जगह सबसे बड़ा धनबाद में है। धनबाद के बाद बरौटी में, बरौटी के बाद कहाँ तो चौथा कैसे लगा
चौथा
के यूनिवर्सिटी
के मेडिकल है।
अच्छा ये बता ये जे पढ़े बता
क्या है खटाल खोल दे खटाल में आदमी वहाँ प्राइस थोड़े भाई लाया बीमारी तो अथी नहीं जी भैया भाई जो 15 किलो वाला चल भाई
ना तो सही
वो आओ कच्चा रोजगार है
सदाजवा के का डाले ठीक है
ना है
तो सबसे बढ़िया है भाई जो काटू लगे भर के रख दे
इस का दे दे
सिरोही ठीक है
वो एक नंबर है
ना
उन्हें ठीक भी है काम हम भी ज्यादा नहीं
कोई पाई नहीं
तो काम हम
अरे यही है हमर में लगलो हमर में
ना तो चरा भी देते ना घर में रहते
घर में चल वो देखे वो
मुर्गी आ बकरी आ रहा है
पूरा ले गेलो ना
हां हम वाला बचत में अच्छा है सीजनली भाई जो साल में 4-5 को सीजन ऐसा ना आवा कि बकरी जुटा ना है
अरे हो पले कुछ का
होली मदारगंज में भी लगा रख
हां
बाबा काल के ना
बाबा का हवा से गुम हो गया
अरे बाबा वो ना कालू ना की बकरी
बाबा के
देखो दोस्तों ये रहा हमारे गांव के बगल में जो शमशान मशान बोलते हैं वो है और उसी मशान की जगह पे देखो कितना ज़्यादा बड़ा गहरा करा दिया गया है हमारे गांव के लोगों द्वारा। और हम अभी अपने घर से निकले हैं। और आप लोग जानते ही हो कि हमारा एक दुकान है छोटा मोटा जो कि मेन रोड पे है, तो वहीं पे अभी जा रहे हैं। तुम वीडियो में बने रहना। यहाँ पे देखो समुदाय भवन है, इसमें बच्चों की पढ़ाई किया जाता है। हमारे ही गोतिया में एक आंटी चाची हैं जो कि टीचर हैं इस भवन का। देखो किस तरीके का पानी का बहाव होता है नल से। देखो यही रोड जाता है मेन रोड पे, जहाँ पे हमारी दुकान है उसके बगल से ही मेन रोड में मिलता है। ये रहा मिल जो कि हमारे घर का बगल का जो पड़ोसी है उनका मिल है। और देखो इस तरह से गौ माता भोजन कर रही है। नाद में गोद मिला हुआ है कुत्ती, उसे ही खा रही है।